We're Dr. Sandra Southard, Dr. Fern Webb, Dr. Juan Luque, and Dr. Lourdes Vazconde Garbonate, co-leads for the Community Outreach and Engagement Corps of the Florida, California Cancer Research, Education, and Engagement Health Equity Center. CARE 2 is a bicoastal cancer research and training center that brings together researchers from Florida A&M University, the University of Florida, and the University of Southern California.
The CARE 2 Health Equity Center is funded by the National Cancer Institute Center for Reducing Cancer Health Disparities. CARE 2 is committed to eliminating cancer health disparities and promoting health equity among Black, African American, and Hispano and Latino adults living in California and in Florida.
Our center focuses on 3 specific cancers: prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer, and lung cancer. We want to welcome you all who are listening to our We Care 2 podcast.
Now we would like to introduce you to our host for this first season, Pastor Rhonda Holbert. She's a breast cancer survivor and an advocate, and the founder and CEO of the Celebrate Life Cancer Ministry, which is a nonprofit multicultural organization available to anyone affected by cancer and their families. Pastor Rhonda also serves as one of our CARE 2 Community Advisory Board members.
Hello, 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 and welcome to We Care 2, the podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Rhonda, founder of Celebrate Life Cancer Ministry, and we have embarked upon this podcast to bring education and awareness to the masses. And we're going to have a conversation today around bringing breast cancer awareness to a younger generation. One of the things I realized when I was going through my cancer journey is before the age of 40, I didn't even know what a mammogram was, let alone that I was supposed to have one. So surely we want to be able to bring this information to you all today and hoping that you'll be able to take away at least one thing. So today we have with us Tiah Tomlin Harris, who is an advocate, an educator, and a breast cancer survivor. She is nationally recognized as an advocate and a cancer coach in many of these areas, dedicated to empowering women impacted by breast cancer, particularly Black women who face disproportionate high risk. After her diagnosis with an aggressive form of breast cancer, what she calls cancer, Tiah vowed to help as many women as possible thrive despite the disease. Welcome, Tiah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you actually brought a guest with you today, Janai. All right, Janai. So would you introduce Janai for us?
Yes, Janai. Janai is one of our cancer fighting cuties. She is in high school and she is a big ambassador to really bring more awareness, not only to breast health, but to women's health overall. So Janai, if you want to come on and just quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm Janai and I am a teen ambassador with Tiah and My Style Matters. I'm only 17 years old, and it's such an amazing opportunity to be able to be here with you all and talk about this openly. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump right in. So Tiah, can you share a bit about your journey and what inspired you to start educating young people about breast health?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks for asking. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, triple negative breast cancer under the age of 40. I wasn't of age to get a mammogram. Breast cancer really wasn't on my radar. And I look back, when I think about my journey, it really started when I was in middle school. I had an auntie who was not a blood relative, but she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And in our family, we didn't talk about it. We just knew that Aunt Linda had breast cancer. She lost her breast, and that was it. And, during those times, we didn't have the internet. I didn't have anything I could go and Google or what have you. We had these big old books called encyclopedia for those who may be tuned in. And, as a 12-year-old, I really didn't understand what does it mean to lose your breast. I mean, you've seen people who are amputees. You've seen people who have lost their legs or, an arm or a hand or a limb or what have you. But the thought of losing your breast was just mind-boggling to me as a young girl. And I remember being in my gym class with Miss Craig, rest in peace, who has recently passed, ironically, I believe it was from cancer, but she had given us these shower cards. And I remember reading over the shower card, and it talked about checking your breast. And I really didn't know what I was doing. But at that time, like I said, when my aunt was diagnosed with breast cancer and me getting this card, I said, well, I don't want to lose my breast, so I better check them. Now, not knowing what I was doing at the time, but that actually is what saved my life when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, because it wasn't a conversation that I had in my home. My mother never talked to me about it. And, this is not a dig to my mom, but her mom never talked to her about it. So it's kind of that generational thing. We didn't talk about it. It wasn't on our radar. And what I found is it's really not on a lot of people's radar until it happens to us. And so, what saved my life and me being able to discover the lump by doing a self-breast exam, I wanted to pour that into young girls, because we're seeing that we're getting younger and younger being diagnosed with breast cancer, particularly, Black women. And I really want them to get to know their bodies. We've taken this information out of the school systems. And so I developed a program called Breast Health Matters, where we're educating teen girls and women about breast health.
Wow, that's pretty good. And you know what? I gotta recognize the fact that folks just don't talk about it. So there's one population that cancer is a taboo. And it's a whole nother thing for something just not to be on your radar. We can be talking about a lot of different things, and maybe the majority or the most recent health issue in our family is not cancer at all. So therefore, that's more on our radar than the cancer. But even still, there are some basic things that can bring us to prevention and early detection.
Absolutely.
But Janai, darling, tell us, how did you become involved in this conversation about breast health, and what does it mean to you?
So I became involved with this conversation about breast health after witnessing the impact that it had on many women that my mother worked with in her breast cancer studies. I met Miss Tiah a little over a year ago, and after hearing her share her story about breast cancer, I realized how serious breast health was, and no one in my family has been affected by it personally, so the conversation never came up as a personal matter itself. I'd only hear about it through research from my mother. And for the past year, I've done some very eye-opening research of my own, along with Miss Tiah. And I've been hoping to help other young women, my age and younger, to hopefully save themselves from this disease, or if that conversation does come up in a doctor's office, to prepare themselves for that type of journey. I remember my sophomore year of high school, one of my classmates had just learned that she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and that was another thing that really opened my eyes to the severity of it, that women are being diagnosed younger and younger every day, and we're not even old enough to have mammograms yet. We were in high school and she was dealing with such a severe battle. So it's just something that's very important to me. I feel like all women and young women should have this conversation openly, and it shouldn't be something that you only talk about when it's too late or when you're already diagnosed.
Wow, that's really, really good. So why do you think it's important to talk to young people about breast health? And actually, I kind of want to know what age should we begin? Where should this conversation begin?
Yeah. So I'll take that question, and then Janai can jump on in. What I've realized, we've taken those healthy conversations out of the classroom. And what's happening is when we're taking these things out of the classroom, or, back in the day when I learned about sex education, right? It was in middle school during gym period. But what I'm learning and hearing from our youth is those conversations don't exist anymore. And so young girls need to get to know their bodies. And I think once you set the tone of, let me talk about breast development. I mean, they're on you. They're stuck on you for the rest of your life, right? They're not going anywhere. The prayer is that they're not going to go anywhere. So if I can educate you and teach you about breast development, and then teach you about healthy breasts, how to have healthy breasts, how to check them. Our breast tissue is the most complex part in our bodies. That's the part of our bodies that's constantly growing from the time that you're in your mother's womb until you become, an older, mature adult, even into being a senior, right? Your breasts are constantly changing. And we really need to get to know that part of our body, know what they feel like, know what they look like. And so for us, we start the young girls when they hit puberty. And we know that some girls hit puberty around 8 or 9. And so it's kind of a sensitive topic, and talking about that. And that's where we can go in and talk about breast development. But really getting into, breast health, the meat of breast health, we're looking at around 11, 12 years old. The reason why we choose that age is because once you hit puberty, the things that you're exposed to can put you at a greater risk now to be diagnosed with breast cancer. When we look at a lot of the hair care products and skin care products, and when you're that age, you want all the good products that, the products that smell good, or the bottles look pretty, and perfumes and things of that nature. And so we really want to bring more awareness to the importance of breast health and the things that can put us at a greater risk for breast cancer as we get older. And then when we think about the young girls like Janai, in her case, she's 16, 17 years old, the age range, these young girls are soon going to be going off to college. And if we don't pour that information into them, once they get to college, no one is talking to them about it. And so we want to prepare them so that if they do discover something is different or abnormal in their breast, they can address it right away. And so that's kind of how we approach it at My Style Matters in getting these young girls educated. We also believe that, in some communities, this may be that child's only time to hear about this topic. And the youth are influencers in their home. And if they hear those topics, then that's something that they will go home, take to their mom and ask, hey, mom, did you get a mammogram? Do you check your breast? Or grandma, do you check your breast? Or auntie, do you check your breast, right? And so that may be their family members' only time of hearing about that conversation. And so we believe by pouring into these young girls, they're going to go home and start having those conversations with the women in their lives.
Wow, that's pretty good. That brought me back to high school. It wasn't until high school when I actually had the conversation in school. And we had this popular little blue book. And the book was literally passed down from the seniors would give it to the incoming freshman class. So by the time you would get it, the pages are falling out and you got rubber bands, but that was the badge of honor to hold that book and to have that sex education information and to be able to read it and know a whole lot of things. So to recognize that it's not offered in school so much anymore, it just blows my mind what we've taken out and have not replaced. So it will take people like us to bring that awareness to our communities. So what are some of the myths or misconceptions young people might have about breast health or breast cancer?
Yeah. So some of the myths that we've seen, is centered around like wearing bras. Like that's a huge one that we get asked about quite often. Will my bra cause cancer? And the belief is, because of the lymphatic system, which is something else we don't talk enough about, but with the lymphatic system, what it's believed to do when you're wearing a bra is that there's restriction to the lymphatic system, which is not allowing your lymph to move through the body. And so that's the belief by, some of the people why they believe that, hey, wearing a bra can cause breast cancer. There's also the thought of the underwire within the bras. And so what we tell young girls is, we want you to do what you feel more comfortable with, right? If you feel like, hey, when I get home from school, I want to be more comfortable, or even women, I want to take off my bra, right? I believe in October 12th, I think it is. It's like no bra day, right? So we tell them, in the home, if that's something that you're comfortable with, or if you want to wear wireless bras, that is perfectly okay. And so these things are really important to us to, address with the youth. Another myth that we found is, in addition to the bras, we get asked this question a lot, is centered around, deodorant. Can deodorant cause breast cancer? And so when we look at some of the research that's out there, They're still researching this, trying to really figure out, does deodorant cause breast cancer, right? And so I always tell people, really read the labels and understand the chemical ingredients in the products that you're using, aluminum, parabens, those things we do know that have been studied and that do have a connection to breast cancer as a breast cancer risk. And so we say, if you're going to find a deodorant product, look for something that doesn't have the aluminum in it. Look for something that doesn't have, the parabens or fragrance or of that sort in those products. Again, those are things that can help lower your risk. We also hear that if I don't have a family history of breast cancer, I don't need to worry about it because it really only happens to, people who have a genetic disposition or family history. And that's not true. As a matter of fact, 80 to 90% of people who are diagnosed with breast cancer don't have a genetic mutation, right? They don't have a family history of breast cancer. And so it's very important for us to really hone in on, checking our breasts, getting to know our bodies, getting to know our breasts. If we feel something that looks different, we see something that looks different, definitely go get it checked. And I would say another myth that I typically hear, and this is more so for women who have had a mastectomy, which means removal of the breast tissue, either as what we call pre-vivor, meaning they are very high risk of being diagnosed with breast cancer. And so they opt to do surgery for breast tissue to be removed but without being diagnosed with breast cancer. And then you have people who have mastectomies after they've been diagnosed. Before it's a prophylactic mastectomy. And then for those who have been diagnosed, it is just a regular mastectomy. And so what we hear is, if I've had my breast tissue removed, I've had a mastectomy, I won't get cancer ever again. And while that lowers your risk for being diagnosed with breast cancer, it does not say that you're totally not going to be diagnosed with breast cancer, right? There's always a risk factor for a recurrence of breast cancer. So those are the myths that we typically hear. I mean, of course, there's a few more, but those are the main ones that I typically hear from women. And when it comes to young women, that it's for old people, right? Old people get diagnosed with breast cancer. And of course, unfortunately, that's not true. Statistics show that breast cancer, 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. And when we look at the number of women that have been diagnosed under the age of 40, we're looking at about 5% of people who have been diagnosed with breast cancer overall are what we call AYA, a part of that community, the adolescent and young adult community. So we really have to continue to educate our communities, no matter what their age are. If they're young and they're having, their menstrual cycles, that there is a risk factor for us to get diagnosed with breast cancer, even though the risk factor is not as great until you're over 40, but that is a risk factor.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I was diagnosed at age 40. I was 40, which means that I had cancer under the age of 40. Yeah. And when I think about what is cancer, so cancer is when an abnormal cell does not leave the body. Our body is created to have the cells grow, they develop, they grow, and they leave. But if a cell becomes abnormal and it does not leave the body, it's kind of just like kicking it, right? So it's got its arms folded, legs crossed, and I'm just staying here. I'm not going anywhere. And then it leans up against another cell. And because a bad apple does spoil the whole bunch, it's leaning up against another cell, and now they both become abnormal. And then they decide they're going to have a party, and they invite another close cell, and now there really is growing and is growing and is growing, and eventually it will become a cell that is big enough to be detected. And so a lot of times people say, everybody has cancer cells. Well, everybody has the opportunity to have abnormal cells develop in their body that doesn't leave, and that is a better definition of how we can arrive at that statement. And so with that, what are some of the symptoms, the signs that young people should be aware of when it comes to breast health?
The major sign that we see, of course, is a lump. We tend to talk about a lump often. And what the lump usually feels like, it's something that's hard, like a seed. It's really, really hard. And it's something that you can't really wiggle or you can't move. It's really just stuck in place. So that's one of the main symptoms that we see when we're teaching people how to detect, not necessarily detect breast cancer, but how to feel for some abnormalities. The other thing would be things like dimpling in the breast. You may see, some type of dimpling in the breast. We'll call it retraction. You may see the breast nipple inverted. That's another thing that we typically will see, an inversion of the nipple. You may also see that one breast could be really, really higher than the other in terms of its location, meaning it's kind of some shrinkage that's happening. You could see some puckering in the breast. You could experience itching that just doesn't go away uncontrollably. You don't know where it's coming from. You could have some pain, and the pain doesn't necessarily have to be in the actual breast tissue. You could experience pain under the arm. You could experience pain even in the back area. The other thing that you want to look for is any kind of discharge. Are you seeing any kind of discharge within the nipple? And when we teach them how to do self-breast exams, we always say, pinch your nipple, squeeze your nipple ever so lightly, right? Because if you're having any kind of discharge coming out, whether it's some kind of, milky fluid and you haven't had a baby, or even if you've had a baby, because we see that too, after women have babies, that they will go to the doctor and get checked. And sometimes that's when breast cancer is discovered. But we'll tell them to check their nipples also. If you have a rash on your breast and you don't know where it's coming from, or some bug-looking bites that's all over the breast, or rash on the nipple, that could be another sign as well. And even the vein pattern, if your vein pattern has changed, that could be a blood supply that's actually going to the tumor. So those are things that you want to really look at when it comes to your breast and observe what's happening with your breast. You're not detecting cancer when you're doing a self-breast exam, or a breast awareness is what they also call it, but you're detecting abnormalities. Is something different going on with my breast? Am I experiencing something, whether it's a physical thing that I see or whether it's something that I feel? If I notice something different, I need to go get it checked to determine if it is indeed breast cancer.
Thank you for sharing that, because a lot of us, we just don't know, because now even I was taught to look for the little pea size lump. And with having inflammatory breast cancer, which is what I had, stage 3B, age 40, first mammogram. So with inflammatory breast cancer, it's a swelling.
Yeah.
It was red. It was hot. I thought I was gaining weight and it just wasn't going away. And my bra was too tight and it just wasn't going away. So that's what actually led me to the doctor. So we just, like you said, we just have to be able to know what's different, which brings me to, how do you do a breast self-exam? Do you go around in circles? Do you go up and down? Do you put your arm here? Do you put your arm there? What do you say, Tiah?
Yeah, well, we call it the 7 Ps, right? And so the first thing is really knowing when to do your breast exam, right? And so when we think about the 7 Ps, what we're saying is period, right? If you have a menstrual cycle, you want to do it 7 to 10 days after your menstrual cycle. If you don't have a menstrual cycle as a result of, being an older woman in menopause, we tell them to pick a day in the month and be consistent. And one way to be consistent is you can feel it on the 1st. There's campaigns out there that talk about feel it on the 1st. Or you can pick your birthday, right? So let's say November 5th is your birthday. So every 5th of each month, you can check your breast. And it's all about consistency. And that's for people who do not have a menstrual cycle or have a period. The second P is the perimeter. Now, oftentimes we think that just the rounded part or the fatty part is what we're checking. And in all actuality, it's all in the collarbone, coming across the collarbone, down your breastbone or your sternum, under the breast into the ribs, and then into the armpit. Okay, that all of this is our breast tissue that we should be checking. So that's our second P. Our third P is position. So there's several positions and we recommend doing all of them, because as you move your breast, your tissue moves. And so what you may feel in one position, you may not feel in another position. And so what that position looks like is you stand first to do your visual check. You'd stand in the mirror with your hands on your hip, and you're going to look from right to left, left to right at your breast to determine if there's any abnormalities based on what you see. And then you're going to do your physical check. And so your physical check will be, again, hands on your hip, your top is off, and you're going to use the pads of your fingers, which is my other P. You're going to use the pads of your fingers, 3 or 4 fingers, and you're going to do palpations, my other P. And your palpations will be dime-sized circles, and you'll do, as you're moving your hands into different patterns, then you're going to move your hand into dime-sized circles to feel for any kind of lumps in your breast, okay? The other position is going to be lying down, right? So you're going to lie down and you'll put a little pillow or something under the shoulder. You'll put your hand behind your head and you'll take the opposite hand to do your physical check. And then you'll switch, right? And again, when you're lying down, your breast tissue is now going in a different direction due to gravity. The other position would be to stand up and do it in the shower. And we really like to encourage people to do it in the shower and make sure that you're putting something on your skin to help your hands to really glide, but also being intentional as you're checking your breast. So usually in the shower, oftentimes we hear that women are detecting breast cancer when they're in the shower, but using a little bit of soap and you're able to really feel what's going on in your body. And the last position is one that you don't hear too often, but I always tell women, put your hands on your hip and lean forward. Allow your breast to hang so that you can put your hand up behind the breast tissue. And the reason why we say that is because for our other P is the pressure, right? So when we're doing this, we want to use light, medium, and deep pressure. And as we're doing that, what we can discover is sometimes tumors or lumps that are detected, they can be closer to the chest wall. So by using a light, medium, and deep pressure, feeling your breast, if you lean forward and getting your hand up behind your breast to actually feel, if a tumor is closer to the chest wall, you have a better chance of feeling it than not leaning over and allowing your breast to hang. And so when you're doing your self-checks, and you're using the pads of your fingers, I talked about patterns. So there's 3 different patterns that we typically recommend. One is the circular pattern, and that's just really working your way around the actual breast in a circular pattern. The other pattern is lines. And so when we think about lines, we want to start from the collarbone and work our way all the way down under the breast and come back up, into the middle of the chest bone, and also checking into the armpit. Feeling around, doing your palpations, 3 small circles, light, medium, and deep pressure to feel for any lumps. And then the last one is wedges. And that's pretty much working your hand in. So let's say if this was my, the breast, the fatty part, and my knuckle was my nipple, we're really working our way into the nipple and working our way back out of the nipple. Right? So some people will do their hands kind of a glide. Some people will do the light, medium, and deep pressure, right? Working their way to the nipple. The other thing is being sure to, when you're doing that, hold the nipple, because you don't want it to really stretch and be uncomfortable, but also squeeze the nipple, okay? So squeeze it and see if there's any, discharge that may be coming out of the nipple. And so those are the 7 Ps. Again, that's the period, your perimeter, the position, the pads, the palpation, the pressure, and the pattern. So if you do those 7 Ps, that is what we consider to be ways to perform a self breast check.
Wow, I tell you, this has been so informative. So how can young people become advocates of their own health, even at an early age? Because, the other thing is older folk, there's this generational divide and older folks are just working with the people in their circle, but we need the younger people. So how can they become advocates and get involved?
Yeah, so one thing I would definitely say is, based on where you're located, find an organization that's in their community that focuses in on breast cancer and breast health, and get really plugged into those organizations. Here at My Style Matters, we have our program for breast health ambassadors. We call them our cancer fighting cuties. And what they do is we educate them about breast health, and we equip them with information and knowledge and teach them how to be advocates. We put them and create opportunities in the community where they can speak about breast health. So whether it's a conference, whether it's a outreach initiative, we put them in front of people and allow them to talk about this subject matter, because the more they talk about it, the more we normalize the conversation. And so that's one way, of course, also one thing that Janai brought to the table is our Teen Talk Tuesdays. And so what they do is they take over our social media platform and they actually talk about different topics as it relates to teens and their health. So we have them to interview people, whether it's healthcare providers, whether it's survivors, researchers, we have them to do the work. They lead the charge and we sit, the adults, so we sit back in the forefront and just mentor them and support them. So these are ways that they can get involved, look for a project. Volunteer at the hospital. I know that back in the day, they used to have the candy stripers that people, could be a candy stripe. But even if you're a part of an organization, find out what are your initiatives? What is the mission of the organization, or, let's say the Girl Scouts or what have you, or 3D Girls? What are their initiatives that they're doing around health? Usually they have health initiatives. And so, talk about how can we bring up the subject about breast health within our community as teen girls so that we can be equipped to be an advocate. So there's different types of, advocacy. There is advocacy in terms of community and outreach, but there's also the self-advocacy, right? Advocating for yourself, having conversations with your healthcare providers, asking them questions about, your breast, right? Because again, it's a part of your body. We can't run from it. And we can't just look at it as it being some type of sexual part of our body. It is there for a reason. It is there for nurturing and things of that nature, but it is a part of our body, just like our hand, right? So we shouldn't see it as any different than our hands, but we should ask questions. If we can ask questions about our heart, we can ask questions about our menstrual cycle. Why can't we ask questions about our breasts and how to be healthy? But I also think that providers should lead some of these conversations. And I think that's where a gap is, that, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so somebody has to bring a level of awareness to you about it. And so if that's something that we can really get our providers to talk more about it to young girls, now we can start normalizing these conversations in our homes.
And you know what I would add, because Celebrate Life is a little guilty on this one, but I would add, young people, if you come to an organization that doesn't have it, ask them if you can start it.
Yeah.
Or if they tell them that's something of interest to you, of getting the information to the younger people. And an organization like ours, we would say, no problem, let's do that right now. Absolutely. In fact, I don't be surprised, Janai, if you see us reach out to you to help somebody else get that conversation started on the West Coast.
Absolutely. And, even with our program, thank God for technology, that, we've had some cancer fighting cuties in New York. Like, we don't have any limits on where a cancer fighting cutie is located. Our goal is really to educate them, equip them so they can then go out and continue to share this information with amongst their communities that they support and serve.
All right, man, this is good. So what resources or program does your organization offer to educate young people? We talked about the breast fighting cuties, but are there any other opportunities anywhere else that you know about?
Yeah, well, one of the other programs that we do, because sometimes you can't reach people just talking about breast health and breast cancer, right? It's like, ew, I don't want to talk about that, right? So I have to meet people where they are. And so we developed a program called Safer Black Beauty, where we're educating women and young girls about the products that we're using on a daily basis, because those products that we use put us at a greater risk for breast cancer because of the, endocrine disrupting chemicals that are found in them. And so by being able to meet them where they are, now we're able to open their eyes to talk about the conversation around breast health. But I would say in terms of other programs, I'm not sure of other programs across the nation, what's happening where else. I do know that, some organizations are trying to educate more young girls, college age girls. But in terms of the teens, I don't know how many programs actually exist. And we saw it as a gap, right? I go back to my experience. I don't have children, but I have nieces and nephews, because boys can be diagnosed with, breast cancer too, or men. But my goal was really to, I don't want my niece and my nieces and nephews to ever have to hear that word, it's cancer in their lifetime. So if I can equip these young girls, my prayer and my hope is that we can lower the risk or lower the numbers. We can reverse those numbers, because now people are more educated, not just about checking their breasts, but also what are the risk factors and how can they start making those healthier and safer choices now, and not wait until they get older, but they can start
Absolutely.
now.
So one of the other things I would just like to know is, have we had any challenges running into people not wanting to know about it, or was their response when we do bring this information?
Yeah, we do, from time to time, people are just not interested, right? It's like, that's not going to happen to me, or there's a fear of breast cancer happening to them. There's fears of, I have a family history. I got a phone call. It's interesting you asked that question, because I got a phone call from a lady in Florida. Had never met this young lady. Someone, knew the work that we were doing around working with young girls and teens with regards to breast health. And she had a family member who lost her grandmother, her auntie, and her mom to breast cancer. And her niece was actually, she lived in Brazil, and she was under her father's care, and her father did not have the conversation with her at all. It was like one of those things that was like almost forbidden. And so she called me and she said, my niece is coming to stay with me for the summer, and I really want to have this conversation with her, because she's going to be going off to college soon. And I'm really afraid, because she's lost her mom, she's lost her grandmother and her auntie. And how do I have this conversation with her? And she said, I really don't know how to have the conversation with her. She was more afraid of bringing up the conversation and it being a trigger for this young lady. And I told her, I said, well, you have to get her on common ground, right? You have to get her in a place of comfortability to be able to have the conversation. I said, you don't want to have the conversation in your home, because it's easy for you to run, right? It's easy for you to just walk away from the conversation. I said, but don't focus on breast health. Focus on being a young lady. Focus on self-care. Don't make it something that's so scary. Focus on self-care. I said, go to the spa, have a spa day with you and your niece, go get your nails done, and, go get facials or something like that, and bring the conversation to her from the angle of self-care. And of course, she called me back and she said, oh my God, what you told me really worked. And I said, yeah, because if you jump in and straight talk about breast cancer, she's already probably fearful because of losing her mom and her grandmother and her auntie to this disease. That's a hard conversation to have with someone who's young, who's had those experiences. So we do have people that, really don't want to talk about it, but there's ways to talk about it without saying breast cancer or breast health. It is building that relationship, having that girl time, but also focus on its overall self-care.
Exactly. And you know what? When things occur and people find out about it, that's actually one of the better times to actually have the whole conversation. Also, so like when a person passes away, it's a great time to talk about pre-planning insurance, right? It's a great time to talk about, hey, what do you want to do? What is your option? So your thought process around that particular challenge in our life. And so, yes, there is when people are being diagnosed or pass away from breast cancer, that is truly a good time to start introducing those conversations as a family, so that we can bring that awareness. Because it was, I remember even when I was going through my journey, because I was 40 with next, my nieces were around 20, and they were still, even though I was going through it, nobody wanted to talk about it. I wanted to talk about it. I didn't know why I wanted to talk about it, but I did. And then to find out that with me being diagnosed at 40, they should actually start being screened around 30, because it's usually a 10-year span for family when one person is diagnosed. the next generation behind them should start at an earlier age. And that's why we should also tell our doctors. But it's a great time to start having those conversations. And I'm just going to stand on a soapbox right now and just tell folks, please don't wait. Share it with the young people in your life. If you're a teacher, find a way to introduce it in your curriculum. Have separate, I actually teach youth entrepreneurship, and we do take one day and we divide the boys from the girls. And I have a guy come in and talk about guy stuff, and a lady come in and talk about lady stuff. Because even as entrepreneurs, again, we want these young people to live long enough to have some healthy bodies, healthy lives, and healthy businesses. So we kind of pull it all together. So while this has really, really been a great conversation. So Tiah, is there anything you would like to say before we leave today?
Yeah, I would, just echo some of the words that Janai said, get involved. Breast cancer is a health crisis. And the only way that we're going to address this is we got to bring more awareness to this disease, and not only awareness, but action, right? We have to really take action, teach people about taking action. Not only just breast health is not just checking your breast, but it's also, again, our lifestyle choices. We know that that is a factor, a risk factor for breast cancer. And so when we have the conversation, we need to have the full conversation, the whole conversation with the youth, and not just the youth, but women also, and men. That's another thing that we're looking to do starting in 2025 is really teaching men about breast health, because, not only can men get diagnosed with breast cancer, but they have daughters, right? We have single fathers, you have these individuals that this is a people's disease. It's not just a woman's disease. This is a crisis across the board. And so it's very important for us to continue to have these conversations. And the other thing is, if anybody who's interested in becoming a cancer fighting cutie, we would love to have them to be a part of our program and connecting with Janai. She is wonderful. She'll be graduating soon. So my heart is a little tender. I'm excited for her, but it's a bittersweet for us. And hopefully she'll continue on even when she's in college to take this message with her as she goes into college. But we would love to have them to be a part of what we're doing, to just continue to spread this word, to continue to educate our community about this disease.
Go ahead and just add a new level, just create a new level of the cuties, like the brownies, the bluebirds, the brownies, and the Girl Scouts. Do it like that, and you'll have it forever.
Yeah.
Well, ladies, I'd like to thank you both for coming on We Care Too, the podcast, and sharing this information. I know that it's going to bring us to a place where we are able to talk again. And maybe we can find some grant money to take this information and do a collaborative effort from the East Coast to the West Coast, and just continue to bring the information, because this is powerful and necessary. Maybe we just need to do it on the podcast, to share the education and awareness, because there's more to it. There's a lot of things that we need to be talking about in the realm that our young people need to know. Don't wait until we run into it, and to be able to say, oh, by the way, I meant to tell you. So, but again, ladies, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
So until next time, choose life.